Welcome to the Prevent the Preventable podcast, where we're on a mission to change the landscape of brain hemorrhages by driving awareness, delivering education, and pushing for real action. Now, brain hemorrhages affect millions of lives every single year. But at the Nathy Kate Moss Trust, we're committed to preventing them before they happen and funding pioneering research to advance treatment for when they do. In this podcast, we'll dive deeper into the world of brain hemorrhages because the more we understand, the more we can create real change, and together we can truly prevent the preventable. Hello and welcome to today's episode of the Prevent the Preventable podcast. Now, I am so glad that you have joined us because today we're diving into a topic that is relevant to every single one of us, and in truth, a favorite topic for most people: food. We all know that diet plays a big role in our health, but have you ever really thought about the role it plays in your brain health? Today, we'll be exploring exactly this and discussing if the choices we make in the kitchen actually help protect our brain and reduce the risk of something as serious as a brain hemorrhage. We'll be looking at what brain health really means, how diet can influence our blood pressure and the strength of our blood vessels, and also which foods are having a negative impact on our brain health. Joining me today is Nicole Goode, a registered nutritionist and author who specializes in making evidence-based nutrition both practical and sustainable. Nicole is passionate about cutting through the noise around food trends and giving people the tools they need to make confident, informed choices for their health. In this episode, we'll be covering the links between diet and high blood pressure and brain hemorrhage risk, the foods that can best support our brain's blood vessels, common diet myths and misconceptions that might actually do more harm than good, and practical, everyday swaps and strategies to make eating for brain health simple and, more importantly, realistic. Now, today's episode is number 7 in this series, which means we are now over halfway through the series already. There have already been some incredible conversations, and we've covered such a wide range of topics already, from looking at the research at the University of Manchester, which the Nathy Kate Moss Trust supports, to hearing what loss really looks like from a widow, to our last episode where we discuss what recovery and rebuilding your life looks like after a brain hemorrhage. So if you haven't had a chance to listen to them yet, make sure you head back to those earlier episodes, as there is so much helpful information for you if you are navigating loss or your own recovery, or simply interested in our work at NKMT. Now, at NKMT, we're passionate about prevention, and diet is one of the most powerful tools we all have at our disposal. By the end of this episode, I truly hope that you'll not only understand more about the connection between food and brain health, but you'll also have some clear, actionable steps to put into practice straight away. So let's get started. Nicole, welcome to the Prevent the Preventable podcast. Thank you so much for being here. And obviously you're quite local to us, which is nice. We've had people come from Scotland and Cumbria and all sorts. Okay. So, but it's great to have you here, especially as an expert and an author. And we'll talk about your book a little bit more as well today. But to give our listeners a bit of background about you, could you share with them a bit about your work and your career journey and what kind of got you into this field of nutrition in the first place?
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you very much for having me. It's great to be here. So I'm a certified functional medicine practitioner and a registered nutritional therapist. My background is actually in neuroscience. So that's where I started. Whilst I was there at med school, I actually became ill myself. So I had chronic fatigue, unexplained symptoms, passed around doctors. Nobody could really get to the bottom of kind of what was going on. Lots of actually neurological symptoms, which was ironic given that I was studying neuroscience. And that's really what started my journey with the nutrition and the functional medicine, because the convention, my intention was to go into conventional medicine, and I'm not anti it at all. It's brilliant, but I just couldn't get answers for what was going on with me. So I think because maybe I was scientific and studying science and things like that, I started just looking into research. I wanted to try and understand what was going on. It was all post-viral for me. And I found functional medicine and nutrition and started just working to try and help myself, because I wasn't getting anywhere with sort of conventional medicine. And I started seeing improvements. Nutrition really for me was the turning point. I think that was probably the first big thing that I did that really, and when I say this, people always sort of say to me like, oh, well, did you, because obviously I was a student at the time, did you have a really bad diet? I didn't. So I was a student, but I still lived at home. So I was still cooking, and we'd always had home cooked meals. And so I wasn't eating a bad diet. It was just learning and understanding about what was going on for me, what might be going wrong in the body, what I needed to do to try and feed that. And I know we're going to talk a bit about feeding the brain and things like that, but that's really what it was. It was just figuring that out. So it was really that kind of turning point for me, and seeing how powerful food could be, for me, particularly with the fatigue, and I loved it. I just loved that this, something that was so simple, something we do every single day, something we have to do to kind of survive, but that had so much power. And I loved it. So I ended up going back studying nutrition. And it kind of
and here we are.
All went from there.
Yeah, I think that point that it's so simple is an interesting one, because it's so simple, but it could be so impactful in either direction. So either it can have benefit your body and your brain, obviously that's what we're talking about today, in a really positive way, or equally, if we're not eating the right foods, and we'll talk about what those foods potentially are, it can have a really negative effect on our body as well, to the exact your real life story that you've already kind of touched on there. And obviously it feels like you're perfectly placed, having studied sort of neurology, I suppose, at university, and then with the work that you do now in nutrition. It's quite nice overlap I suppose you set us up quite nicely for the podcast, for the episode. But we talk about diet. We all I think majority of us, probably myself included, will think about our physical health. How is that affecting us? Maybe even predominantly in the first place, our weight, but then how our skin looks, whether we're eating enough for our immune system. But I think it's quite a way down the line for us to start thinking about our brain health.
Yeah.
Can we define that firstly? What would we define as good brain health?
Yeah, I think to kind of just touch on what you said there, I think we do focus when we talk about like food and nutrition, we instantly go to weight. And that's something that we've talked about, for so many years, and there's so many different diets out there that have been done over the years for weight loss. And I think very quickly people will catch on to things about skin, and they'll be like, they will do it for things that are
you can see aesthetically.
You can see, people are very keen, they want to see those differences. When it's something like, for me, it was the energy, the fatigue, it was brain fog. I had a lot of that. When it's something like that is more of a symptom, we don't instantly go to food. So we don't instantly go to food with brain health. It's not, you don't sort of say, it's my brain is the problem, so what should I eat? It's just not a conversation that we have very often. Even on, I remember my first day on at neuroscience at uni when I was doing neuroscience, and on the welcome lecture, we sat there, and the lecturer came in and he said, I'm going to teach you around 2% of what the brain can do, because that's all we know. There is 98% of what the brain does, and we don't know what that is. And I remember we all sort of sat there and we're like, we're here for 3 years for like 2% of what the brain can do, which is crazy. But, the brain there's just so much that we don't know about it. And a lot of that, not one thing that we did, in a neuroscience degree was about food, none of it. And I think that's is quite fascinating that we don't make that connection. The brain is one of the most energy hungry organs in the body. So it uses around 20% of our energy that we need daily. And we need a lot of energy. So we have mitochondria, which are these little tiny things in our cells that produce the energy. And if you imagine that they are inside the cell of the body, that's how small they are. And they have to produce our body weight in energy every single day. So it's a huge amount that they are producing, and 20% of that is used by the brain. It's hugely energy intensive. So that's what we eat directly fuels how much energy gets made. So that's the first thing, and the brain needs that energy. Our blood vessels is another thing that I know is, something obviously you want to talk about, very linked to the brain. It's very sensitive to blood pressure, which obviously we'll talk about, but inflammation, oxidative stress, and all of these things, foods can be inflammatory or anti-inflammatory. Oxidative stress is essentially the rust that we produce. It's byproducts of chemical processes that go on in the body. Foods either feed that or help to get rid of it. So that's really important. So, diets that are high in things like your processed foods and sugars and, those sorts of things, and I know we'll probably dive into the foods a bit more, but that's all going to be having an impact on the brain health, the blood vessels, our blood pressure. Likewise, certain foods, as you said, can be helping that. So it can be reducing inflammation, it can be protecting cell membranes, it can be protecting the walls of the vessels. There's lots of things that that food can be doing to support that.
What I'd like to do is break those down. What foods they are, what foods are good, what foods are bad. Obviously, I don't love the idea of labeling good and bad. But what I would like is for people to get a more rounded understanding of the impact that those foods are having on their body.
Yeah.
We will come on to that.
Yeah.
I just want to touch on first a term you use there, because I think that does get thrown around a lot, which I think, and there's a lot of terms that can get thrown around, and that's why it can be confusing, is inflammatory and anti-inflammatory foods. Can you just expand on that a little bit? What does that mean?
Yeah, so we have a very delicate balance in the body, and when we talk about the particular foods, I'll sort of go into this a little bit more. But we have, if we take an example, so things like omega-3s, which most people have probably heard of now. Lots of people take omega-3 supplements. We have different types of omega in the body, so omega-3 is just one of them, and foods have different types of omegas in them. So this is just one example. There's lots of different scenarios where this happens. Omega-3s are anti-inflammatory. Things like omega-6s are inflammatory. So if we have the wrong balance of different types of foods in the body, then we are driving inflammatory pathways. So we're producing chronic inflammation in the body. Chronic inflammation in the body causes no end of problems. And we're talking pretty much every chronic disease in the world has inflammation as a driver to it.
Yeah.
It's very rare that you get anything like that doesn't have inflammation as part of the problem, at least.
Yeah.
So it's really important that we do have anti-inflammatory foods in the body.
Do we need a certain level of inflammatory food? Talking about there, like omega-6.
Yeah.
Do we need some of those? Is it then about just the balance of how much we have of each?
Balance.
Okay.
I'm never really one for demonizing any type of food. There are certain illnesses that I work with whereby, cutting a food group might be important. But generally, if we cannot cut a food group, we're not going to.
Yeah.
Diversity is really important in the diet, and we want as many foods in there as possible. So, yeah, I'm not really one for demonizing many foods. But we need a balance of everything, but we've got to make sure that balance is right. So you need more of the anti-inflammatory than you do the inflammatory. If you've got more anti-inflammatory than you are eating inflammatory in the body, then your body will stay in a state of having low inflammation. Yeah. If you are eating more of the inflammatory foods, then your body will be in that sort of chronic inflammatory state, and that's when we get real problems.
And how much is individual? So these are kind of like rules, let's say generic rules for us to think about. Okay, this generally applies to most people, but everyone's personal biology will be totally different, and somebody might respond to a certain food in different way than another person might respond to. So I guess that's where somebody like yourself comes in.
And that's where functional medicine comes in. Your functional medicine is personalized medicine. So that's what we always say. It's we don't have if somebody, I can get people come to me and they could all have the same diagnoses. Let's say there's 5 people in front of me, all got the same diagnosis. I could be doing completely different things with all 5 of them, because it's not, functional medicine is less concerned with the actual diagnosis and more concerned with what's actually going on in the body. So for some people, that inflammation might be off the charts, and we might really need to heavily work on inflammation. Other people might have a little bit of inflammation. They might have, lots of viral load in the body. For me, viruses were the trigger. So it's finding out what the individual triggers are for people to bring everything back to balance. And it is a whole body thing. It's not about taking, just the brain. Everything is connected. For our gut, for example, we've got a nerve that runs from our gut directly to the brain. So if your gut health isn't good, then your brain health is impacted. Our immune system, 70% of our immune system is in the gut. So, there's connections there. So everything is connected. So it is important that we take a whole body approach, and everybody's body is different. Everybody always says, oh, well, it's genetics and there's nothing I can do about it. Genetics is
a good cop-out.
Yeah, it is. Generally, it's changed, obviously varies slightly for various different things. But on the whole, genetics makes up about 20% of health problems that happen. 70% of it is environment. Yeah. The good thing with that is 70% we can change. We can change our environment. We can change our diet. We can change our lifestyle. Genetics, okay. we can't change our DNA, but different things that we do will turn on certain genes or turn off certain genes. So there's still an element, it's called epigenetics, and there is still an element of change that we can have there. We can't change our fundamental DNA, but that's a very small part of the picture.
I think there's a good quote around epigenetics, which is something like your genetics load the gun, but it's your lifestyle that fires it.
Yeah, so genetics load the gun, environment pulls the trigger.
Hi, I won't take up too much of your time, but if you're listening, it's probably because you care about making a difference. And the truth is, we couldn't do any of this without you. Whether you've run a race, come to one of our events, whether you donate regularly or have made a gift to us in your will, thank you. You're helping to fund life-saving research into brain hemorrhage treatment. Now, just £33.91 pays for 1 hour of research at the University of Manchester. That's 1 hour closer to improving survival rates and reducing long-term disability for thousands of people. And here's the thing, every pound makes a difference. In fact, if everyone who interacted with Series 1 of the podcast, whether by listening to it or downloading an episode, watching a YouTube clip, or one of our reels on Instagram, if all of those people donated just £1, we could fund half a year of research. And if you'd like to help, the link to donate is in the show notes. And it goes without saying, thank you for helping us save lives from brain hemorrhage. Now back to the episode. Yeah, which I think is really, really true. Like, you might have these underlying causes, but your lifestyle's the thing that will trigger it.
It is. I work a lot with autoimmune diseases, and that's very much that way. We have the genetics to, if you don't have the genetics to develop an autoimmune disease, you'll never develop one.
Yeah.
If you've got the genetics, you could develop one, but it is only if your environment pulls that trigger and sets something off that you will actually get one. So you could have the genes all your life, never pull that trigger, and you'll never get an autoimmune disease. Yeah. So genetics is not the final part of the story. It's the very beginning bit, and everything else we do after that is.
I've heard lots of people at certain points saying, "Oh, well, they lived to 100 and they used to have a glass of whiskey every day, and they would eat bread and butter for breakfast, and things like which you typically think aren't that great for your health, but you would imagine, well, maybe they didn't have the genes that could necessarily be triggered in that way.
Maybe not, and also people that are already 100, we're living in a very different world to what we're living in.
Yeah.
And that's, a lot of this comes from the sort of blue zones research that's been done. But they, the things that our grandparents ate are entirely different to the things that we eat now. So I have patients who will eat something with gluten in, so bread or pasta here in the UK, and they'll have a horrendous response to it. And it might not be, actually it can be brain fog a lot. It might not be gastric, it can be brain fog. And they will have terrible issues, can't eat, can't touch the stuff, makes them really tired, get really bad brain fog. And then they'll be like, I'm going on holiday. So they'll cut it out here. And they'll be like, I'm going on holiday, I'm going to Italy. And they'll sort of say like, I'm in Italy. Who's going to go to Italy and not have a bowl of pasta? So, they'll go to Italy, they'll have a bowl of pasta, and they'll come home and they'll be like, I'm fine. I'm going to eat pasta again. I'm absolutely fine. And I'm like, okay, you're not, let's see what happens. Because in Italy, they're still using the ancient grains. So they're still using the grains that our grandparents ate. Here in the UK and in places like America and things like that, we are using very hybridized grains. Everything has been messed with. And they have changed grains so that they are more drought resistant, so that, they can grow quicker. There's all sorts of things that have gone on with changing food. So the world we live in now, very different to the world that somebody who's already 100 was living in back then. So yes, again, genetics part of that. But actually our environment, again, is a huge part of that. And their lifestyle, if they're having a glass of wine every night, but they, live on a hill and they're very active and they're walking up and down that hill all day, it's maybe has less of an effect than if we're sat at a desk, very sedentary, and then
stare at our phone whilst having a glass of wine.
Yeah, exactly. So there's a lot of environmental things, even with that we can still pinpoint things and pull out of that research. But we do have to take into consideration that the people that are 100 now are not living as we're living.
Yeah, it's a really interesting conversation. I mean, I find the blue zones fascinating, and looking at, and if anyone doesn't know, the blue zones are, is it 5, 6, 7? Certain number of.
It's changed, because I think one's just been declassified. So
great.
There are some that I think it's might be one in Japan. I can't remember exactly, but yeah, one of them has been just been declassified, which is really sad because it's always been a blue zone. But yeah, these blue zones are, I think there's about 6 of them, and they are basically areas where they have more than average people reaching 100. And they've sort of researched them to see why, what it is about their diet and lifestyle that makes that happen. And there's lots of things that they've pulled out of that, and they've actually, really interestingly, they've tried creating a blue zone. So in America, in California, they actually tried to create a blue zone. So it said, can we take an area now where people are not living that long, and can we implement these blue zone theories and put them in place? What will happen to people's health? And the area got classified as a blue zone, so it did actually work. So
that's really interesting.
Yeah,
I would have thought the exact opposite. I thought it would be really hard to, because a lot of it is habits, social habits, community habits, individual habits.
All the fast food places went there. It was an area that had lots of fast food restaurants, things like that. They took all of that away. So all of that was gone. And they really did have to completely change the environment that they lived in. But they did manage to do it, and they created it, in America and California, where you would really expect not to have a blue zone.
But I think to your point there, Nicole, it's like it's not always just one thing. It's not always just the food that you're eating. There's many different factors that are at play. And I think going back a few steps, you talked a little bit about that food that we're eating, how it's created, etc. And that gut brain connection. And obviously our key focus is the brain. So how does, the food that we, therefore, we're talking about that gut brain connection, how does it then actually affect that brain health? And if we're talking about whether it's brain health, or is it more that it is affecting our blood pressure, which is affecting our brain health? What's the connection there?
Yeah, so eating for the brain, we're specifically looking at things like the inflammation, really important, stabilizing blood sugar as well. Important for a lot of things, but definitely important for the brain. And we're also talking about eating to improve circulation. That's a really important one as well. Practically, that's going to look like things like, I know we're going to dive into the food a bit more, but things like colourful fruit and veg, fish as well, for those sort of anti-inflammatory nuts, seeds, whole grains, lots of these sort of things, plenty of water. But what we're actually trying to do is, so we're trying to do, I guess, kind of 3 things. We're trying to feed the neurons. That's the first thing in the brain. So that's through healthy fats and through that blood sugar balance. We're trying to protect blood vessels, which is really important. Antioxidants, polyphenols for that sort of side of things, which we'll dive into. And then we're looking at reducing that oxidative stress. So that is that rust that we talked about. So we have chemical processes going on in the body constantly, all day long. All day and all night. And that the byproduct of that, it's much like, if you think of a car engine, for the car engine to run, there has to be things coming out of the exhaust. So it's the same in our body. For the chemical processes to happen, there's rubbish coming out somewhere. That's a bit like that oxidative stress. And that is, things like, it impacts things like your blood pressure. Toxins will impact it. Diet will impact it. So that's the sort of things that we're sort of looking at.
So can we be more specific then? What are those foods? If we were to add in some more foods to support our brain health, what would you start recommending to listeners?
So, again, as we said, personalization is really, really key. But there are some general things that we can sort of look at. So leafy greens, really important. So things like your spinach, your kale, your rocket, all of those sorts of things can do really well. They are packed with things like magnesium and folate and antioxidants. They're really good. Berries as well. They're for that sort of the antioxidants, the polyphenols. Actually not just berries. Berries we tend to talk about because we get like the blackberries and blueberries and those sort of things, but really any of the purple foods. So little swaps as well. So particularly at this time of year now, things like sweet potato are around. Switch it for purple sweet potato. Broccoli, switch it for purple broccoli.
That's interesting.
Carrots, purple carrots. They are quite accessible now, a lot more than they used to be. So any of those blue, purple, very sort of dark foods really going to be beneficial. Oily fish, which I know not everybody loves.
We had a conversation over a coffee before this episode about how I'm not the biggest fan of oily fish, but
Really important for that brain health. So the oily fish is all to do with the inflammation. Yeah. So we're talking salmon, mackerel, anchovies, sardines, herring, trout. So the fish that really smells like fish.
Yeah.
That's the stuff.
That's the way I describe it. It tastes like you're like eating the sea.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly what we want.
Yeah.
So all the fish is good, but the oily fish is really the one, and that's full of that omega-3. Which is that anti-inflammatory, healthy fat, and that supports the blood vessels, supports the memory. So that's really good. Nuts and seeds as well. Olive oil. So again, that's all the healthy fats. Nuts and seeds have got things like magnesium as well. But roughly, actually, and this is, we talk about the fats a lot, and we talked about diet and weight loss, and the low fat diet was in. Well, I mean, when was that? Was that like the 80s, 90s,
yeah.
something like that? That it was hugely popular.
Yeah.
Everybody was on a low fat diet. 60% of the dry weight of our brain is fat. So how anybody thinks a low fat diet is a good idea when we're talking about brain health. I mean, everybody wants good brain health. Let's be honest. We can't survive without our brain. Whether we're talking about really dealing with things like blood pressure and hemorrhages and things like that, or whether we're just talking about longevity. Our brain is super important. We can't replace it. It's got to be looked after. 60% dry weight of the brain is fat. A low fat diet is not feeding your brain. So it's super important that those fats are in there. And that is the nuts, the seeds, the olive oils, the oily fish that I know you don't love. But yeah, it was a major problem with the low fat diets, huge problem in the, like we said, in the 80s, 90s around. But the other thing is that we focus heavily. So there's a couple of different types of omega-3, which is the anti-inflammatory one. There's EPA and DHA. And we talk a lot about EPA because that is anti-inflammatory generally for the body, and it's the one we tend to talk about. But actually, if we're talking brain health, the DHA is really important.
What does that stand for? Is it
hugely long? We won't do. But yeah, it is really important for brain, and actually, the balance of a lot of the omega supplements are EPA heavy. So actually in clinic, when I'm working with somebody with brain health, I use a supplement that is DHA heavy. Still has EPA in it. We need both. But actually when we're looking at brain health, and this is where sometimes with supplementation, people sort of say, well, I tried something and it didn't work. It wasn't personalized. Or maybe that person didn't need that. They've just, they've read that it was good for something. So they took it. We all do it. We've all made that mistake. But yeah, if I am working with somebody with brain health, I'll make sure that supplement of the omega, if they need a supplement, if they're not eating oily fish, for example, is a little bit more DHA heavy rather than EPA, because it is really important to make sure that things like that, you've got that sort of that right balance. And then things like cholesterol as well, which we've not mentioned. Cholesterol gets talked about as a negative thing all the time, but we need cholesterol. We need cholesterol in our body. It's not all a bad thing. So we're talking things like eggs with that, but it's cholesterol is needed for the myelin, which is the sheath, so that goes round every neuron in the body, every neuron in the brain and down your central nervous system. And we have it's essentially a if you have like pipes around your boiler, and you put they have this sort of padding that you put, the insulation that you put around them, that's a little bit like the myelin sheath. So it goes round and it protects, and it makes sure that your neurons can signal properly. So messages have to go from the brain all over the body, and they travel down the neuron protected by that myelin sheath, and they have to jump over, we're going to go scientific now, but jump over like a synaptic gap to the next neuron, and that's how they travel around the body. If the myelin is not as good as it should be, if it started to break down or anything like that, the signaling can't happen as fast, so it slows down. So the messages going around the body slow down. So that has a really significant impact on brain health. So yeah, we talk about cholesterol as a negative thing a lot, but actually,
so what can you eat for that then?
So eggs really good for that. It's one of the really good foods. And again, they got kind of demonized as well. I think most foods at some point or another have been demonized. But yeah, really important for that. And people went on to egg white omelets and and things like this. You need the yolk. So we need that. We need the whole egg. Again, I think that was probably the low fat thing was, let's do the egg white omelets and things like that. No, have a whole egg omelet. Like, get the cholesterol in there too. Really important, for the brain as well.
Huge thank you to Colony Co-working for continuing to support the Preventable podcast. Now, at the Nathalie Kate Moss Trust, we have a huge ambitions to completely change the landscape of brain hemorrhages. And whilst we're a small but mighty team, we're all working remotely. And in truth, that's part of our strength. Remote working means that we can connect with incredible talent from across the UK and around the world, helping us push forward faster and smarter. But without a central office, we need flexible, inspiring spaces where we can come together to work productively, collaborate meaningfully, and work on this huge goal we have set ourselves. That's where Colony comes in. Colony is a growing network of beautifully designed co-working spaces here in Manchester, home to creatives, founders, freelancers, and teams of all sizes. They are spaces built for focus, connection, and progress. Not just a place to work, but an environment that actively supports your growth. And they've helped NKMT do just that. To find out more about how Colony could support your business, check the link in the show notes. But that goes back to what you were saying at the beginning. We think about diet, even the term nutrition. A lot of people use the term nutrition, and I see this a lot with like some personal trainers and gyms, and they'll use the term nutrition, but all they're talking about is weight loss.
Yes.
So they choose foods that are, as you say, are low fat, but actually the nutritional value within that is, not really that high.
Yeah.
And actually, therefore, it's going to have adverse effects to other, functions within your body.
And my other pet peeve with the weight loss thing is it all became around counting calories.
Yeah.
And calories are not created equal. If you're eating 500 calories of vegetables and meat, and you've got a full plate of all really good foods, it's not the same as eating 500 calories of chocolate. So calories are not created equal. And I'm not an advocate for counting calories. It's much more important that we get lots of the good foods in there. And it doesn't mean you can't have chocolate, but just, it's everything in balance, and making sure you're getting the right foods in there to feed you.
Do you think there is ever a place for looking at calories from a nutrition? Like, as if somebody is really struggling with weight loss for some, or do you think if you focus on these whole foods and actually, the nutritional density of what you're eating, that there will be a byproduct of actually losing weight?
I think often there is a byproduct. And I think more importantly than counting calories, if somebody is struggling to lose weight, ask why. So we always say in conventional medicine, they ask what. So what have you got? In conventional medicine, we say why. Why have you got it? So if you are struggling to lose weight, there's usually a reason. So cutting calories is probably going to, it's probably going to be a temporary, it might work initially, but it's probably going to be temporary because whatever is stopping you from losing weight, you're not fixing. So you're not getting to the root of the problem. So if somebody is struggling, why? What's going on? Is there a hormonal imbalance? Is there a thyroid imbalance? There's lots of different things, stress, adrenal imbalances. There's so many different things that can be impacting whether we can lose weight or and likewise the other way, some people lose weight and are struggling to put it on. Either way, there's lots of different things that can be having that effect. So asking why and trying to get to the bottom of that, I think, is more important than a calorie counting.
I think that is, it's so applicable to a lot of things. I think we look very surface level when we look at the symptoms, and we try and treat the symptoms so often, whether that is, a stress, because somebody is particularly thinking about this, because we had this conversation this morning, but around stress, we always try and treat the symptom rather than actually digging down and going, what is it that's really causing this? And this is why I think it's not always in silence. Your nutrition is not completely unrelated to the stress that you're experiencing over here or your work. They do kind of fall together, and the habits around that as well. So we've spoken a lot there around good food. Is there anything else on that, or can we talk a bit more about the food that maybe we should avoid as well?
Let's do the food.
Might be a long list now.
I mean, like I said, I'm not a huge advocate for totally cutting the foods out. I'm a big fan of the 80-20 rule. So I think, people always say to me, well, how much can I have? I think as a general guideline, 80-20. If you're eating really well 80% of the time and 20% of the time you're having a glass of wine or a bar of chocolate or whatever it might be that you want, you're generally going to be doing okay. You're not going to be doing too much damage to your body.
Yeah. I also think in that vein, like if you're eating well 80% of the time and you're feeling that, you're probably then feeling the benefits of eating well. When you eat something that is maybe not contributing to your health, shall we say, necessarily, you might enjoy it, but you might not want to push it because you can start to feel the negative effect. Exactly.
Yeah.
So
once you start, I mean, sugar's hugely addictive. It's more addictive than cocaine. And yet we don't treat it as a drug.
Yeah.
So, it's a massively addictive thing. And when we get that out of the system, and some people do find it easier to get it out of the system by going cold turkey initially, and just sort of saying, I'm not going to have any. It depends. Some people find it easier to do it slowly. Some people find it easier to just say, I'm going to cut it out. And then slowly they'll sort of start having a bit. But people do then tend to notice actually symptoms come back and they don't feel so good. And okay, yeah, maybe if you're on a night out or something like that, and it's kind of worth it, for the odd night. But generally people won't go back to where they were because they realize, they realize the impact that is having on the body. When we're eating it all the time, we don't realize that it's the food that's doing it because we're always feeling like that. But yeah, in terms of things that we really kind of shouldn't eat, ultra processed foods is a big one, and they've had quite a lot of press actually lately, which is good. But they're high in trans fats, high in sugars, additives. They raise blood sugar. They're full of salt. Sugars generally are huge in them, and the damaging fats as well. So usually high in those, the more sort of omega-6s, the more inflammatory fats. They increase inflammation, oxidative stress. They damage the blood vessels. So ultra processed foods really shouldn't be in the diet. And that goes for everybody. These things that we're talking about now really are just generally for every single person.
Can we break it down then? Can we get some examples of what an ultra processed food would be? Would it be a ready meal or a chocolate bar, or or what would that look?
Yeah, I guess the really big ones are the ready meals.
Okay.
One of the sayings that we use, it's a little bit black and white, but one of the sayings that we use is, if it lived in a field or grew on a tree or a plant, it's not processed. If it was made in a lab, or a factory, it's processed. That's a little bit black and white because a lot of food does go through a certain amount of processing, but generally that's what we're talking about. The ultra processed is where it's been really heavily heavily processed. So things like your ready meals, where it's really been they're putting lots of additives in. They're putting they've got to keep it so that it lasts longer. So it's having lots of additives, lots of sugars, lots of salts, flavorings, things like that. So yeah, the ready meals are a really big one with that. Seed oils as well is one that has had a bit more press lately. Then I'm in kind of two minds over seed oils. I don't think they're necessarily inherently bad in the sense that having a little bit is going to cause you a problem. It's too much seed oils that is the problem. I think
so that would be things like sesame oil, or
so you're talking rapeseed oils, sunflower oils, things like that. So not your olive oils. So they're the things we want. Olive oil has got the omega-3s, that's anti-inflammatory. Seed oils tend to have more of the omega-6, so they tend to be more inflammatory. So we don't tend to advise people don't cook with those. Instead, use coconut oil is okay. Olive oil is really good. So using things like that instead. So sort of cutting those out, getting that omega-6 down that way, really beneficial. Too much salt. Again,
and what is salt doing? Because we hear this a lot, and one of the, particularly on the subject of high blood pressure. We know that too much salt in the diet can, raise blood pressure.
So it's putting pressure on the blood vessels, which in turn raises the blood pressure. What we're not talking about with salt, and again, this is where nothing is ever quite black and white. What we're not talking about is home cooking with a pinch of salt in. If you are using, the recipe says pinch of salt, pinch of pepper, we're not talking about that. Again, we're talking about ready meals and packaged foods, things where they really are heavy on the salt. And these days you have the have the little boxes on the front of ready meals and things like that, where it will have, how much salt, how much sugar. More often than not, salt's in the red in most of those, or certainly in the orange, but quite often in the red. But yeah, that's what it's doing. It's putting pressure on the blood vessels, which raises the blood pressure. So when we're talking about sort of the topics we're talking about today, that's not a good thing. So salt, and then the other ones really kind of cutting out or reducing alcohol, which no one ever wants to talk about because nobody wants to cut it.
It's the thing that we're okay with. It's fine.
Yeah, and again, we don't have to demonize it. Again, it's not something that you can't have a glass of wine. It's about, I think, not binging is the first thing. So some people sort of say, well, I don't drink all week. It's like, great, but you're having like 8 glasses on Saturday. So not binging, I think, is important. Actually, in the blue zones, as we talked about earlier, a lot of them drink wine. A lot of them will have a glass of wine. They generally don't ever have more than 1 glass at a time. So that's where that sort of the binging comes into it. And ideally, obviously not doing it every single day. But yeah, we don't need to not drink. I think the other thing to kind of mention there is that, alcohol is a social thing. Yeah. And that's just the culture that we now live in. And social connection is really important. Going out for a meal, having food, having a drink, having that social connection with friends is really important for our, for mental health. And, again, in the blue zones, that social sort of side of things is something that came up really, really in every single one of them. They had a lot of community around them. So I think it doesn't need to be a case of like, don't ever drink, but it's that drinking in moderation, being aware of, the impact of it. I think listening to your body as well, monitoring. People can drink different amounts without it. I mean, I'm a terrible drinker. 1 glass and I can feel it. So, I think it's how does it impact you? And learning to listen to your body. But more often than not, if we've been doing something for a long time, so if you are somebody who's been drinking quite a lot for a long time, you're probably not picking up on those sound bites that your body is sending you. To say that actually this is what's causing it. So we don't always recognize that it's the alcohol. And that's the same, not just for alcohol, but the same for anything.
Yeah, I think it's interesting what you're saying about the community piece, because I think you are right. And I think that's where, the pub in the UK, everyone loves going to the pub. It's a centre of a community. And there's something really lovely about that. But I think there needs to be a balance to go, well, if I'm only finding that community by going to somewhere or going out for drinks or, and how can I maybe shift that a little bit and find activities where I have a community, but it's not based on drinking. So to your point, it's not about demonizing it, but it's about recognizing I can still get that benefit, but and it could be a walking group, it could be I don't know, my mum started bridge, those sort of things.
It flows if they and I think it's finding things. Again, something else that's really good for our health is having purpose. So finding things that we love in life, different and hobbies that people love is, different for everybody. Joining a sports club, doing something like a Pilates walking groups, like you said. There's lots of different places. There's creative things now. There's volunteering, where you feel like you're giving a bit back. All of what gives a person purpose will be different for everybody. We all have different things that we feel are important in life. But finding some of those things, I mean, I live in the countryside, so the pub does tend to be the centre of most villages. But likewise, so are a lot of the sports places. There are cricket clubs and tennis clubs and, all of those things around, and they are also social hubs. So I think being part of things, and sometimes that feels a bit uncomfortable, I think, for people to put themselves out there and go and join.
It's hard as an adult
these days.
It's definitely possible. And I think I think the thing to recognize is we all can feel like that. So it's not just ourselves, but we can all feel it, a bit strange making friends as an adult. But I just want to rewind to this processed foods piece, because it seems like this is such an important point to make for a lot of people. Try and avoid these processed foods as much as possible for many different reasons, as you've already mentioned. What would you, if you had a client who came in and said, look, I'm so busy, I've got all my kids, and I'm also trying to run, I don't know, a business or my work, and I'm running around and this, that, and the other. I just don't have time to home cook. And I I have these lovely ready meals that are a good brand and I think they're healthy, but and, are they not okay? Like, how would you advise them to kind of make that shift away from those processed foods? What would be some practical tips? Thank you to our sponsors, Hugh James Solicitors, for supporting this second series of the Prevent the Preventable podcast. Now, sudden brain hemorrhage can turn your world upside down, but discovering it was caused by a medical mistake makes it even more devastating. While nothing can change what's happened, Hugh James's medical negligence team is here to support those who suffered brain injury or bereavement due to medical errors. And their support doesn't end there. The Hugh James Wills and Estate team is also on hand to help you plan for the future with clarity and care, because when the worst happens, the last thing you need is added complexity. To find out more about how they can support you and your loved ones, head to the services page on our website and book a free call with them to discuss your concerns. You can find the link to all of that in our show notes.
Yeah, I think it is really difficult because we are all time poor. It is something that I think we have to decide we're going to prioritize. There is an element of that. We have to decide that we are going to focus on our health, but there are things that you can do to help. So things like batch cooking. So batch cooking at home and making making, I don't know, we're in winter, so making some like slow cooker stews and things like that, portioning them out, putting them in the freezer so that you could just grab something out the freezer on a busy night and cook it, heat it up essentially. It's home cooked, so it's not going to have the additives and the salts and things like that in the sugars. Likewise, a lot of the ultra processed foods have hardly any nutrients in them. So if you've home cooked it, you're going to have the nutrients in them. And it's as important as not getting those things in the diet is what you are actually getting in the diet. So a lot of the processed meals we're eating and getting very little nutrient benefit from. A bit like we talked about calories versus nutrients. You'll be getting calories from it. You're probably going to put weight on with them, but you're not getting the nutrients that you need to feed the body. So things like batch cooking, I think, is really good. Getting the kids involved if you've got children as well, I think is really important. It sets them up for the future. So it's going to teach them cooking and how to cook and what foods are important. And I mean, I can't remember what the percentages were now, but I read an article, scientific paper that they'd done on looking at how many children could name different vegetables. And it was it was up in like the 60s or 70s, something like that. I can't remember the exact figure. But it was a ridiculous number of people who couldn't name, or children couldn't name.
Yeah, I've heard things like that.
Basic, and I'm talking not like a really rare one. I'm talking like potatoes, like really things that we should see all the time and know. So take children to the supermarket, let them pick some foods, cook with them at home, have it as a weekend activity, something that you do. I think important to take them to the park and things like that too, get them outside, but see cooking as something that you can do together, see it as family time, and then portioning out, freezing for those nights that are that are busy, and getting some simple recipes. I think people think home cooking has to be it means you have to have a big recipe with 20 ingredients in. You don't. A fillet of salmon with a side of a few different veg, sides with a few different veg on, is a healthy meal. It doesn't have to be complicated. There's loads of recipe books out there now that are one tray or one pan meals, where you can throw things in. As we go into winter, slow cookers are brilliant. Put them on before you go to work, throw everything in, come home, your dinner's done. So things like that as well, I think can really help. So there are things that can help, that can save time. There's still an element of, obviously, we've got to put a little bit more time in than just going to the supermarket, buying a ready meal and throwing it in the microwave or the oven. But the benefits are so
it's an investment in your health, isn't it? At the end of the day, it might take a bit more time, but so does going to the gym.
Exactly. And it's amazing how many people will say, I know I need to do exercise, I know I need to go to the gym, so I'm going to do that, and then we'll make time for it, as busy as they are, and then they'll go home and say, I haven't got time to cook, so I'm going to throw it in
pizza or whatever.
So I think sometimes it is mindset as well, and I have to do a lot of that work with patients when I'm talking to them. Is what, and I always say to them, why is the gym more important than what you're cooking at home? Let's break it down. What are the thought processes of what's going on there? Because sometimes it is just shifting that mindset to actually this is really important. It's as important for my health as is doing the exercise I'm doing or going to the gym.
Yeah. We've spoken a lot about preventative. So, making sure that we're eating to protect our brain health, protect our health generally, and what kind of is involved in that. But obviously, a big part of our community is those people who've maybe suffered a brain hemorrhage. We've had people on the podcast who've shared their lived experiences with us. And we know that even if they've recovered well, and I say well, sort of in quotation marks, they will themselves say, but I still get really tired. I still get brain fog. I still struggle with, X and Y. Are there any, or is there anything that they can do? Are there any particular foods that they can eat to help after a brain hemorrhage to help with their recovery?
Yeah. Again, I would caveat this with personalization, and we are talking. I'm gonna give some examples, but we're talking generally. For most people, what that sort of brain recovery things that might help. Protein is key. So the building blocks of protein are amino acids, and they're the building blocks of every cell in our body. So protein is really, really key. That's going to help to rebuild tissues and to support repair. So our body can't repair without protein. Doesn't mean you need to go on a really super high protein diet.
Yeah, and just on that, is all protein equal? If somebody has steak 3 times a day, is that okay? Apart from the cost?
So there's different things. The cost would be a big one with that. But there are different things at play there. So red meat, again, is more anti-inflammatory than things like fish. So generally, there's nothing wrong with red meat.
It's more anti-inflammatory.
Sorry, it's more inflammatory. More inflammatory. Fish is more anti-inflammatory. So we tend to say fish kind of 2 or 3 times, or the oily fish 2 or 3 times a week. You can eat as much of the other fish as you want. Things like red meat, we tend to say kind of once a week. And then things like your leaner meats in between, so your chickens and things like that. That's a very generalized guide for proteins. I think also importantly is quality. And this is where it can get a bit difficult for people, because then we get on to price. Obviously, if money is not a factor, go and buy the best beef you can get. Make sure, as a minimum, make sure it's grass-fed. I think that's important.
Why does that make a difference? From a nutritional point of view, what's actually different between something that is high quality versus low?
So there's a couple of different things. There's certain things now around antibiotics that are used in animals. With that, we're getting on to organic. So if meat is organic, they can only give the animals antibiotics if the animal is sick. If it's not organic, and I'm not saying that every farmer or is doing this, but if it's not organic, technically they can give animals antibiotics as a precaution all the time to keep them well, to make sure that they can sell that cow and make money. So that is a little bit, that's a bit of an issue. Growth hormones and things like that have been used in the past to fatten them up quicker so they can kill them quicker. So, I know people don't love these conversations because they don't like to think about where the food comes from. But it is, things like that are an issue. And in terms of then what our food is eating, there's a saying that we have, which is, we are what our food eats. So we're eating our food, and what our food is eating is also going into our body. So that's where the grass-fed things like that. In terms of getting around the things like the chemicals and the hormones and things like that are used on antibiotics, not everybody can go out and buy organic all the time. If you can eat red meat, a little bit less buy organic, fine. If you can't, go to butchers, go to local farm shops rather than your big supermarkets. People always think they're going to be a lot more expensive. Quite often going to a butcher's is not. It's a little bit more inconvenient because you've got to go to another shop. But go to the butchers. Butchers will tell you, if you're talking farm to table food, which is really, I think, one of the most important things we can do, eating seasonally, eating locally, farm to table food, really important. They know the provenance of all their meat. They know where it's come from, which farm it's come from. They know which animal it is, if you really want to get into it. All of that is known, and they know the quality of that food. Ask questions. You will find butchers will not have a problem telling you. Supermarkets won't know. They can't tell you. But butchers where it's come, or farm shops where it's come from the farm, will be able to answer all those questions. So I think educating yourself and using some of those smaller local shops is really important on that sort of on that quality with protein.
Yeah. So protein for brain recovery.
Protein is
critical.
rebuilding tissue, supporting repair, really, really important. Omega-3 fatty acids, again, I know I keep harping on about these. They come up in everything. But yeah, reducing inflammation. Also, for the brain, they help support neuroplasticity. So for somebody in recovery, neuroplasticity is this... it's where our brain can almost rewire itself, so we can produce new connections, new neural pathways in the brain. And omega-3s are really good for helping with that neuroplasticity. So if you're on that on the recovery and repair sort of journey, omega-3 is going to be helpful for that, as well as the anti-inflammatory, which we've already talked about. All the colourful vegetables. So think about eating 2 of each colour food a day. Yeah. Really important. So that's things like you've got your reds, your greens, yellows, orange, the blues and purples, and the whites and tans. So there's 6 different sort of colours that we say. 2 of each a day is really important. And that's the antioxidants, so reducing oxidative stress and getting rid of that damage. So if we're getting rid of damaged cells, we can then produce more new cells, which are not damaged. So again, helping with that recovery and that repair. Hydration as well. I know it's not technically food, but it's still part of that sort of profile of nutrition, making sure that you're keeping hydrated. Also really, really important. Dehydration, and you only need, it's like 1 or 2%. If you're dehydrated just 1 or 2%, it impacts repair. So it's very, very little. So making sure you are hydrated, really important. And if you're really kind of just struggling, sort of just want a really simple thing of like, what diet, what can I do? I think one of the go-to ones that is probably really good is a Mediterranean diet. Yeah. So just thinking about how they do eat in those Mediterranean countries, you will be hitting all of those things. They eat a lot of fish. They eat a lot of colourful veg. They eat a lot locally and seasonally. They do all of that as well. So, thinking about that sort of Mediterranean diet and what that looks like tends to be very anti-inflammatory anyway. And there's loads of Mediterranean cookbooks and things like that out there. Yeah. But yeah, that's, I think, in terms of recovery, I think those are probably the sort of some of the really key things.
I think, there's so much, obviously you have a whole career on it, but there's so much in nutrition, isn't it? And I think sometimes when we break it down to the basics, as you say, like if you break it down to just think about the Mediterranean, how are they living? That's really, really helpful as well.
Yeah.
But before we close, I think what I would love for you to do is, like, I know there's lots of big nutritional myths. There's lots of things that are out there.
Yeah.
You've already mentioned the low fat ones, the calorie counting, and there's many, many more. What's one big one that you think kind of gets a lot of people and that you would like to bust today?
There's so much. There are a lot. I think, we've obviously the low fat one, I think, is a really big one. Salt being inherently bad, I think, is a big one. If you're just using a pinch of salt, that's fine if you're just cooking with it. Salt in those meals, as we've said, is really bad. I think the other one that people want to believe, because it is hugely time saving and it's easy and it doesn't require much effort, is that you can out supplement a bad diet. Because everybody just, wants a magic pill.
Yeah.
Is there something I can just take that's going to heal the brain? And I think that's one of a really big myth that we've got to try and pull people away from. And supplement brands are really good at marketing and advertising these days. They've got a lot of money behind them. They generally can do things like that. It's easy. It's the easy route. And I think we've got to try and just get away from that a little bit. You can't out supplement a poor diet. You can't out supplement a bad lifestyle. You can't out supplement stress.
Is there a place for supplements?
Yeah, absolutely. We use supplements if somebody is really inherently low in, so generally we blood test first. If somebody is really low in something, then supplementing is really good. If somebody has overgrowth in the body, things like that, then there's certain nutraceuticals, things like that, that we use to help get those things out. So they can be really good for that. It's knowing, I think it's knowing what you need. And really the only way to know what you need is to work with a professional on that. We see so many things advertised. I can't tell you how many people come to me and I'm like, okay, so what supplements you're on? And there's like this whole great big bag comes out and it's like, you know, they're on like 20, 30 supplements. Essentially, they're just making really expensive urine. You can't, a lot of these things, you can't actually take up as much as some of these things. You know, you can't take them all up. So you're just wasting them. But there is a place for them. Some people don't absorb things. So like myself, for example, I have to have B12 injections. I eat tons of so B12 foods are like your leafy greens. I eat tons of leafy greens, loads of them, and my B12 will still be on the floor. So I don't actually absorb it from food. I actually don't absorb it from supplements either. So I can take a supplement and I still don't. I was on a high dose supplement, tested my blood again, still can't take it up. So I have to have it injected. Some other things people don't take up from food, and then a supplement can be really beneficial. Somebody like yourself who doesn't like oily fish, and omega-3 supplements going to be really beneficial. So absolutely there's a place for supplements. I think we've just got to get rid of the idea that actually I go to a supplement first, go and eat what I want because I'll supplement with it. That's the sort of thing that we've got to try and get away from.
Yeah, absolutely. Nicole, thank you so much. I feel like I've learned a lot, and I feel like we could have gone on for forever and ever. But obviously we've not actually even mentioned your book. What camera are we on? Flash camera. Optimal You. And obviously I'm you know, you've really kind of given me this, which I know we've spoken about a number of times before, so I'm really excited to dive into this. But can you just kind of summarize what the book is about? Obviously we'll link it in the show notes as well. And also it's been nominated. It has already won an award, but it's been nominated for another award as well. If you can just share a bit about that.
Yeah, so it's a whole body approach. So there is a whole chapter on brain health, which is one of my pillars of health. It is really about optimizing your body. So there are 8 pillars of health, and then there are 4 lifestyle pillars, which I know we haven't touched much on lifestyle, but are sort of strength, stress, sleep, and social connection. So all really important when we're talking about brain health as well. So there's the eight health pillars, the 4 lifestyle pillars. It's very anti-inflammatory, so very good for all of this. Low in all those sort of processed foods. It's got a diet, it's got a meal plan, a nutrition plan in it as well, so people can follow that around through the book. You can read the whole book front to back, or you can dip into certain chapters. So if you're particularly focused on brain health, you can dip into the brain health chapter, and it will also tell you which other chapters and which other parts will link to brain health. So if people really do want to focus on that, then they can. But it really is just about, it's about balance and optimizing everything, anti-inflammatory, which is really important. So
yeah, great, thank you. And we will link. We know that the award you're up for is by voters, isn't it? It's rather than like a board.
Yeah. So it got highly commended for Wellness and Wellbeing book, which was voted for by expert judges, which was lovely. But it's now up for the People's Book Prize, which is voted for by the people, which is really nice as well, because that's you know, it's voted for by the readers, and they're the people that are hopefully getting something from it. So.
Amazing. Well, if you do read Optimal You and you do enjoy it, make sure you also vote for Nicole as well. I'm sure it'd be hugely appreciated. And thank you so much. I feel, as I said before, I feel like I've learned so much through this. I feel like I could go on and on about this. We will link all your website and everything in the show notes as well. But Nicole, for now, thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Great. Thanks. Thank you so much for joining us for this incredibly insightful and practical conversation about the role that diet can play in protecting our brain health and potentially preventing a brain hemorrhage, as this is what this is all about. We hope today's episode has helped cut through some of the confusion around food and nutrition, while also giving you clear everyday steps you can take to support your brain's blood vessels, manage blood pressure, and build long-term resilience. A huge thank you to Nicole for sharing her expertise and for making the science of nutrition so accessible and inspiring. And if you'd like to learn more about Nicole's work or explore further resources on food and brain health, you'll find links in the show notes. As always, if this episode resonated with you, please consider sharing it with someone who might benefit. And don't forget to subscribe so you never miss an episode in this series. And remember, every episode we ask our guests a special bonus question that you definitely don't want to miss. Today, we asked Nicole if there was one small change that you would recommend to people in their diet to help protect their brain, what would you recommend? To see her answer, head over to our Instagram page and join our Change Collective broadcast channel. That's where you'll find all of our bonus content, the latest updates, and plenty of opportunities for you to get involved in the work that we do. Next time, we'll be releasing a very special episode during National Grief Awareness Week, and we will be discussing how you can find purpose after loss and how you can navigate grief and turn grief into action. It's going to be a deeply meaningful conversation and one that we know will resonate with so many of you. But until then, take care and thank you so much for listening.